Greetings, my name is Guy Dauncey. This is the show Change the World, where I like to invite guests from around the island who are really holding a big vision of the future in their hearts that is different and sort of more compassionate, more planetary, bigger and bolder. And today we got big, bold visions with Torrance Coste, who born and raised on Vancouver Island, and I want to come back to this, in constant contact with nature, been a strong environmental values, all your life, now actively working with the Western Canada Wilderness Committee. But before we get into the forestry issues, which we're going to talk forestry, growing up in constant contact with nature, what did that mean for you? Where and how?
I grew up in the South Cowichan Valley, and both my parents, I think, had a good sort of philosophy about bringing me up, letting me kind of decide how much and how little I wanted to go outside.
So don't climb that tree. Yeah. It was the opposite.
No, it wasn't that, but it also wasn't, okay, we're going on a 10-day backpacking trip when you're 6. It was they didn't push me into it, but they also really encouraged me to get out and spend as much time outside as I wanted to, and that was a lot. And yeah, that's sort of what I mean by that. And we lived on a street with forest on one side of it, and houses on the other, and just always being outside. There was always deer in the yard, owls in the yard, and I think that I didn't obviously kind of connect this at the time, but I think that had a big impact on who I sort of grew up to be.
I have a theory that between the ages of 16 and 24, really formative things can happen that make people shape their entire career of working. You get some big vision and I get the sense that something like that's happening with you.
Yeah, I said I grew up in the Cowichan Valley, which is true. I was born in Victoria, and we lived in an inner city neighborhood there until I was about 7. Then we moved up to the Cowichan Valley. Right. So I remember growing up there. Obviously, we lived in a crowded street, on a crowded neighborhood. Lots of kids next door and across the street. And then we moved up to the Cowichan Valley, and it was a lot more lot more rural, and it still is. And that's sort of, I really, started spending more time on my own outside, made friends too, and they were into, swimming in the lake as opposed to going to the mall. And I think that was, I think you're right, that had a huge impact on who I am.
I noticed that. I've been 3 years living up here. I'm in the Yellow Point area and the Nanaimo area. And for young people, there's a lot of out by the river, out in the hills, out on the bike, out on the water, and really loving it,
Yeah, and it, forestry was part of my reality from a really young age. You go to climb up one of the hills just near Shawnigan Lake, and you look out beyond the lake, out to the west towards Jordan River, and there's new clear cuts there every year. There was when I was growing up. You go down a street you've never been on before, and there's some houses, and then you go beyond them, and then there's a huge clear cut, and seeing that was part of the reality of growing up in a place like the Cowichan Valley was something that I was aware of pretty
when
early.
I grew up in England, forestry was so unusual because we had a forestry commission, and they planted everything in rows. Right. And when I came to Western Canada and I discovered what wilderness is, because there is no wilderness left in Europe anywhere, really. Right. And I thought, oh wow, that's what wilderness is. Yeah. Then I saw how quickly it's been cut down. I thought, whoa, and in Britain, no one has any memory of what it used to be like. So you take an area like the Lake District, which Wordsworth wrote his poetry about the daffodils and stuff like that. It's just grass with sheep. Yeah. It's a frigging clear cut with sheep and daffodils, and we write poetry about it because no one remembers that it used to be old-growth forest. Yeah. And that got me alarmed that we can forget that quickly.
That's why I can forgive fairly easily some of the decisions that were made around resource management and forest management 100, 150 years ago here, because people came here from England and Scotland and France. Yeah. They saw these forests and they knew they'd never seen anything like them, and they said, we'll never cut all this down. Right. They didn't have the technology to at the time, and they started, and if it wasn't for technological advances, we probably wouldn't have. Of course there was. And we kept doing it anyway. So most of my frustration is saved for the people who have made these decisions in the last 10 or 20 years and are still making them now.
I've seen very late 1800s photographs of people standing on a tree trunk. The tree trunk's like 3 times the size of this table and having a party on top of it. To say how proud they were of cutting down such a massive tree without any concept of it it's just a matter of we've conquered nature.
Yeah. Yeah, some of the archival photos in Victoria of the BC logging industry, it's amazing that humans could do that with the technology that they had. Of course, big trees have been coming down on this coast for since time immemorial.
Yes.
When you go back to Indigenous resource use, and they were doing it without the machines and the tools that we have now, and I think it's something that I draw inspiration from, because if we could take down these giant trees, some of the biggest in the world, do it safely, do it and without destroying the wood inside, we can do anything.
To get this in context, I don't know if you know the answer, but if you're making a really big war canoe, how long would it take people to cut down, a really big cedar to make a big canoe?
I guess it would depend how many people were doing it.
What methods are you using? Little sort of stone axes?
Stone axes, fire. Lots of there's some trees. I've never seen a culturally modified tree like this. I've seen lots of culturally modified trees, and there's methods of actually removing wood from the tree without taking the tree down. Yes. So in Clayoquot Sound, in a place called Wanajust Hilthuis Tribal Park, or Mears Island, where I'm going in a few days, there's a tree that I've seen on several occasions where a totem pole, a house post it's called, outside all the longhouses where posts telling that family story, and they're 12, 15 feet tall and 2 or 3 feet wide, and there's a tree with one of those that was taken out of the trunk and 500 years ago, and the tree kept growing for another 500 years, and it's still growing now. So you kind of dig a crack, I understand, with stone tools, and then get fire in there, and then kind of carve out the ashes and kind of carve behind. And I've heard that there are examples of where this has been done with canoes. So the canoes have been taken right out of the trees.
When you've got one of the, well, we're going to show a couple of with a really big tree now. How long does it take?
A skilled faller, they obviously are doing it safely. You know, 1,000-year-old trees, no joke to bring down, but they can do it within an hour. Just one faller and a big 6-foot bar chainsaw.
So what I'm getting at here is something to do. Our generation, our culture, has come to this incredible power of machinery combined with fossil fuels to drive. Well, it could be fully electric, but power. So that what would have taken a week with 10 people now is one man with a day. Yeah,
absolutely. And as you've seen this rise in technology, you've seen the amount of intact rainforest on Vancouver Island and across BC go completely away. There's the paradox, I think Jevons paradox, that says as the reason given for technological advances is as we get more efficient, we'll use less and less, be it trees, water, whatever. But Jevons paradox states that as we get more efficient, we use more and more. Right? At no time in human history has it been as easy to obtain, say, water as it is for your average person living on Vancouver Island today. And at no time in history has anyone used the amount of water, the amount of liters of water we use per day.
Let me go to these images we got. The first one, if you can bring it up now, is of just basic, I'm waiting for the image to come up, basic forest. And we'll run through these and you can talk me through them. So talk me through this one first. What's happening here?
So this is a wooded hillside in the Walbrand Valley, the central Walbrand Valley, which is an area that might be known to some of your viewers. It's on southwestern Vancouver Island. The Walbrand River flows out into the ocean over the West Coast Trail.
Next to the Carmanah?
Yeah, the valley right to the northwest is called the Carmanah. And in the early 1990s, after significant public pressure campaigns by the Wilderness Committee, Sierra Club, and other organizations, and thousands of concerned citizens, the Carmanah and part of the Walbrand were protected. A big part of the Walbrand was left outside that protected area, and we've seen logging companies move closer and closer to it since.
So this is protected, what we're looking at? Or
no, this is unprotected.
This is unprotected.
Just outside the park.
But this will be old growth?
Yeah, that's
never been logged.
It's on the north side of the Walbrand River. I think the hill kind of over on the left side of the image would be in the park.
So now,
Yeah, this is down in that forest. This is a tree, you can't know for sure without doing core samples how old they are, but based on stumps of similar size that I've seen, I would guess that one at between 1,000 and 1,300 years, which is the upper range for Western red cedars, which that is. That's a forest activist standing with it to show the scale, and these trees, they're just, you know, we don't have castles or cathedrals on this coast as say you do in Europe. We don't have ancient pyramids. These are those links back in time. When this was a seedling, I think it was the Dark Ages. You know, what was happening when this tree was a seedling, what was happening in the world is pretty incredible to think about. Wow. And what I always like to talk about is we use these trees for pictures. We use these trees because that is what kind of draws attention and why these forests are renowned. But that tree just behind the guy in the shot, that's part of an old growth ecosystem too. So an old growth ecosystem has trees like this one that are over 1,000 years old, and it has trees that are 1 year old.
Well, the seeds are falling, and so
everything
you have,
in between. It's a healthy, functioning system.
So here we have a bit of more of a cross section.
Yeah, so that's me in between those two trees, and I'm crouching and I'm reading flagging tape. So the one in the foreground is actually inside a cut block in the Walbrand Valley. It's slated for logging by a company called Teal Jones, which we've been fighting for the last couple years in the Walbrand Valley. And one of those trees is just inside the cut block, one of those is just outside. So the fact that we're still bringing trees like this down is pretty staggering. The image doesn't show the steepness of that slope. It's a very, very steep grade hillside with a crystal clear Walbrand River down below it. And you know, taking those big trees, you can imagine almost the only thing holding the soil on the hillside is the roots of those big trees. And when you take those, the
water just pulls right off.
Right.
So then, after the cut.
That's an example. That's on the south side of the Walbrand River. That's a cut block that's probably 5 to 10 years old by the same company, Teal Jones, and you know, they talk about doing forestry better. They talk about doing things differently than they did in the 70s, and in some ways they do, but there's no way to make an old growth clear cut look good. There's no way to remove an ecosystem that's that old, that's that entrenched.
And it's not just the trees, but this was the fungus, the plants, the bears, the wolves, the cougar, the birds.
So yeah, the trees, the oldest trees are 1,100 years old, but the ecosystems themselves, the last time they were removed from the land to a scale like that was the last time 10,000 years ago. So, you know, when logging companies say, you know, we can do logging sustainably, they haven't been doing it for 10,000 years. So, you know, we have to call that out because they're just not replicating that system.
So here's another. Is that a clear cut too?
Yeah, that's actually a log drop. So a lot of the logging now in places like the Walbrand, the easy to get to timber was cut 10, 20, 30 years ago. Lots of it's done by helicopter, and this is a log drop site where trees are lifted off another hillside just out of the shot and dropped there. Those are the branches and parts of the trunks that kind of sloughed off and that have been left there by the company.
Just abandoned,
Yeah, they might, you know, if they need to use that log drop again, they'll stack that up and burn it.
I think this is the final shot.
Yeah, this is, that shot was taken in 2013.
This tells me more like, this is you, right?
Yeah.
There's thoughts going on inside your head there. Sure. There's something happening.
Yeah, so I'm doing the math. We'd counted the rings in from that stump. I think that one had 800 on it, and I was thinking about what was happening in the world 800 years ago. I was thinking about I put little needles, like pine needles, on you know, where I was born, where my mom and dad were born, where my grandparents were born, and you know, it's only this far in from the bark and the trees.
I mean, 800 years ago is Magna Carta, which was the beginning of democracy in Britain, when human rights were the first time beginning to be respected. We have yet to have a treaty
in this part of the world.
Arborum Carta, the Charter for the Trees.
Or for living things that aren't human.
So tell me about the work to protect the old growth forest. I know you've had some progress.
Yeah, so the campaign in areas, I mentioned the campaign to protect the Carmanah, which was successful. And part of the Walbrand was set aside. And the logging company now will come back and say, you know, some of the Walbrand's protected. You got what you wanted. There has to be a balance. There does have to be a balance, but on Vancouver Island, more than 90% of low elevation forest has been logged. That's not a balance. There's 10% that hasn't been logged. Some of that's protected, but even if we protect all the rest of it, that's still only 10%. If we get everything we want, we won't even be close to balance. So when the logging companies talk about balance, it's too late for that in terms of getting half of these ecosystems protected, which is what a lot of ecologists globally and biologists are calling for. The movement to protect these forests is gaining momentum. Obviously, the Clayoquot Sound blockades in the early 90s are often referred to as the birth of the environmental movement in Canada, and that's because these forests draw and they kind of breed that they demand people fight for them. You can't walk through them and not have a connection to them. And that's continued now. In 2017, there's obviously other huge environmental issues. Climate change is on the forefront, and the projects that cause it, like pipelines, coal mines, and then you've got other mega projects that flood farmland and trample First Nations rights, like the Site C Dam.
But you had the BC Chamber of Commerce.
That's right. That's right.
So that was a big surprise to me.
Despite all that, despite the fact that the playing field's more crowded now, the momentum, the connection, the understanding, the inherent kind of unspoken understanding that these forests have importance is still there. And in the last year, we've seen, the campaign to protect places like the Walbrand Valley remaining old growth on Vancouver Island has been advocated for by labor unions like the PPWC, the Public and Private Workers of Canada. They issued a very strong statement on the need to protect old growth.
And this is a logging?
This is a forest industry workers unit, primarily mill workers.
So the mill workers themselves are saying we want to protect the old growth.
That's right, because
that 20 years ago would have been like shocking.
No, because 20 years ago there was still another couple of decades of old growth logging to do. Now if you're working in a mill now and you're not close to retirement, then you're not going to be logging old growth for the rest of your career. So the second growth transition isn't just something that environmentalists want. It's not just something that we can do so that we can feel proud 50 years down the road that we saw the writing on the wall and protected the last of the old growth. It's so that these forest industry workers can see out the rest of their careers. And that's it. You'll have the meanest forest lobbyist in BC will tell you that in 25 years we won't be logging old growth, because again, these individual trees take 1,000 years to come back. The systems themselves take 10,000 years. So it's, in a way, when it comes to old growth logging, it's not forestry. It's more like timber mining. That said, I hope that we always have forestry on Vancouver Island. It's always been a part of the economy here, and I hope it always is. It's going to be, again, outside of a couple of decades, no matter what we do with the old growth, it's going to be a exclusively second growth industry.
Before we move on to actual logging today, you also, I believe, had the Union of BC Municipalities. Was that the unanimous vote?
That was passed, I believe, close to unanimously. I wasn't in the room, and because when it's so overwhelming,
that's including a lot of rural forest land municipalities saying
Campbell River,
save the old growth.
Port Hardy, so again, municipalities are seeing. I mean, you have the ones who led that motion, the Port Renfrew, the Metchosin Council, and then on the Chamber of Commerce side, it was the Port Renfrew Chamber of Commerce. And these towns and the businesses within them are seeing people come into the communities because of the forest, because of the old growth, to see the old growth trees. And the difference between coming to camp in the old growth forest and coming to take pictures of it and coming to swim in the rivers and coming to cut them down is that the former can come back.
So for
again
people
and again and again.
If people are watching and say, well, my brother works in the forest industry and my cousin and my father did, they still want to go on working. Talk to me about raw log exports versus value-added forestry.
So it's a great transition, and when people ask me about old growth, about this far into the conversation, I start talking about raw log exports, and vice versa. When people ask me about raw log exports, I start to talk about old growth, and it's because the two are interconnected. In order to get the old growth, because old growth is still a portion of the cut, depending on where you are on the island, where you are on the coast. The old growth makes up a percentage of the amount of the total cut. And in order to remove that from the cut, we're going to have to log less. How do we log less and still keep as many people working, still keep the industry as valuable, bringing tax revenue into the government of BC? that's getting more, we'll do that by getting more efficient.
Yes.
How do we get more efficient? By looking at what we do with the industry that's not efficient, and that's raw log exports. Right. So raw log exports have always been a small part of the BC forest industry.
So just interrupt for a second. Raw log exports,
right.
We're talking whole trees stripped to their branches being sent to China, to Japan?
To China, sometimes to the US.
Okay.
So overseas markets, and yeah, basically they bring the trunks down, take the branches off, sometimes take the bark off, but no more processing than that.
So all of the processing into planks and buildings and architecture happens overseas, not locally here.
And again, it's always been a very, very small part. You can, again, in the archives, you can see photos of sailing ships with the bows and the sterns flattened out to fit 100-foot Douglas fir logs from Vancouver Island, and take them over to, I guess, I don't know, shipbuilders in the UK who didn't want to leave home, who didn't want to come here, but still wanted to work with the best wood in the world.
Well, British Columbia is a colony after all, so the British will take that colony and just take its stuff.
And they did, and right up until the early 90s, raw log exports never made up more than a percentage or two of the annual cut.
And what are they now?
In the late 90s, as the economy started to globalize more and more, and the government switched, and the Liberals came in 2001, that percentage started to climb higher and higher and higher, until we're at this place now where some districts on the coast, it's more than half the cut is cut. Wow. And shipped away on the central coast, where there's not a lot of not a big human population, where there's not many mills. They take them down right into the water, get them onto ships, and take them away. And it's at the point now, it's really hard because timber's measured in volume, in cubic meters. Yes. And the numbers, you know, again, in the mid-90s, it was less than 100,000 cubic meters that was being exported raw. Now, for the first time in 2010, we crossed 5 million cubic meters, then 6, then 7, now 8. Is a cubic meter
like one tree?
8 million cubic meters is 8 million city telephone poles.
Okay.
So most people know what a telephone pole looks like.
And frankly, some of the logs I see on the trucks are skimpy, they're not big.
Some are big, so the old growth is far bigger than a telephone pole, but some of the second growth, no, they're not leaving it long enough. 8 million cubic meters, we did the math on that, and most people know what a logging truck with logs looks like. Yes. If we put 8 million cubic meters on logging trucks and line those trucks up so that the tail of one touched the nose of the other, they'd start in downtown Vancouver and they'd end in Montreal.
Holy moly.
So that's a lot of wood. If we took 8 million cubic meters and built houses out of it, the population of the city of Vancouver could move into those houses if they went 4 to a house. So in a province with a housing crisis, that's an interesting comparison.
We've got 5 minutes left to last. Where do First Nations rights and land claims fit into the future of the forest?
They are the future of the forest. When it comes to either protection or the way we manage the resource when we actually are harvesting, First Nations haven't been as involved as they should be, whether it's making a park or making a new cut block. They have to be involved in both of those, and the potential there is overwhelming, not just in the terms of doing the right thing, but for the environment and for the economy. There's only one group of people who have managed resources sustainably on Vancouver Island, and that's First Nations. They were doing it before we got here. Yeah. Our ancestors still used words like untouched and pristine and virgin to describe the forest. They've been using them extensively. Right. Obviously, there's more people here now. We live different lifestyles, but those teachings, that respect for the land, is something that I think needs to be encouraged, and it's up to us to give that responsibility back to First Nations and to involve them both in protection of old growth and in the management of the forest that we are cutting.
Are there some First Nations that are sort of leading the charge in terms of new attitudes to the way they do things?
Absolutely, and that's not necessarily a new thing. Haida Gwaii, another real strong place of identity for the environmental movement. It is protected. Lots of it's protected. The southern part because of the leadership of the Haida.
But in the actual logging and when there's active forestry going on.
Oh yeah. So there's community forests up and down the island. The Klahoose Nation on Cortes Island have a really neat partnership with the non-Indigenous community there, where it's a community forest that's managed, I think, 50-50. The nations in Clayoquot Sound have retaken the tree farm license title for their territory, and yeah, First Nations involvement is increasing, but the bulk of forest lands is still dominated by just a handful of corporations, who also happen to be major donors to both major political parties in BC.
So now the government's just changed. What's your wish list for the new forest minister?
We need a moratorium on old growth right now, and that needs to come with compensation for the people who are going to be immediately impacted, and then we need a new forest plan that lays out the transition, the fast transition to a second growth economy, an exclusive second growth economy. That can happen. We can do that. It can be led by First Nations, and it can prioritize both human well-being and jobs and family supporting livelihoods in these communities with ecological well-being. But we can't wait to protect the old growth while we develop that, because we just don't have that time.
The private forest lands here on Vancouver Island? I mean, some of the worst clear cuts I've seen are, it's almost like there's no regulations at all. It seems that way. I may be wrong.
And a third of the island is private here on Vancouver Island.
What can be done to sort of do better protection on private lands?
The provincial government could create a new fund where you know, small proportions of the tax base goes towards a fund to buy back that land. You know, the fact that this land was given to a coal baron, you know, over 100 years ago, and has since fallen into the hands of a handful of companies. You know,
viewers, this is because when the Esquimalt and the Nanaimo Railway was built, Robert Dunsmuir, or later Premier, was given masses of land as well, and all the coal underneath it and all the trees on top.
And then he since sold those off or his estate since sold those off to a handful of forest companies who have sold them off to a couple more. There's, you know, serious questions about the justice of that. There are certain First Nations, the Cowichan, the Nanaimo here, who don't have it, who can't access much of their land through treaty because it's so private. So that's a really hard question. You know, a tactic that's been used is looking at who owns those companies, right? So some major forest companies, they have big parts of their shares are held by teachers or held by auto workers, and looking at whether those people who control those companies want these forests destroyed.
So we got to wind up, and if viewers wanted to work with you or to come out trailblazing or do some stuff with you, how do they get in touch?
Wildernesscommittee.org is the fastest way. That's our website. We're also on Facebook.
Wildernesscommittee.org, that's province-wide, isn't it? And is there a button they can click for Vancouver Island?
Yeah, there's a link to the Vancouver Island page right off there. On Facebook, we're wildernesscommittee.org, or pardon me, wildernesscommittee/Victoria office.
And are you looking for volunteers to come out to the Walbrand?
Always. The Walbrand, Clayoquot Sound. We're always looking for people to get out and help build trails. So
look, this has been great. Thanks so much for doing all your work. I mean, thanks for this. If you want to sort of get involved and help Torrance out in the Walbrand and get your hands dirty and see those amazing trees and help save them, go to the website wildernesscommittee.org. My name's Guy Dauncey. This has been the show Change the World. If you'd like to come on the show, if you've got big, bold ideas, or if you know someone you'd like to be on the show, you know, get in touch. For my part, one of my contributions to A Big Bold Future is Journey to the Future. It's a visionary novel set in Vancouver in the year 2032, when a lot of these ideas have already happened, because I believe that unless we have a powerful vision of the world we want to create, we're going to drift along with more of business as usual, and we're going to be in big trouble. So keep the spirit, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.